Okay, this is my attachment. I often do a quick summary or an additional rendition version that's supposed to be shorter. Because I mean, after I listen to what I recorded, it's painful. I appreciate whoever is able to bear listening to me. So I was just listening to it. I'm gonna try to reword things and try to shed light from a different angle and try to tie in a few things that I left out. So essentially, to understand, it's important to understand homosexuality because in the nature that if you have to understand if when you understand homosexuality as an inversion of forces that are meant to all go in one direction in stability, homosexuality is inherently by nature unstable, and that's basically what explains why people who believe in social homosexuality never get anywhere. They continue to want to look for something, express something, attain something, define something. It never settles into. By nature, homosexuality will never create the third gender, which is kind of what because something festers inside. It's inherently unstable. So when I did this, I was trying to explain why it's unstable. All biological functions in the body are forward going. We are born and we continue living, eating, maturing, growing, eating, maturing, growing, 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 eating, growing, 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 until we spend the pasta, the life force is spent. Um, Existence is not a duality between life and death. Existence is all life, and then it ends. But life continues, and all of life. It's like we're little fish in a giant ocean of billions of fish that are going forward, and some stop existing next to us, and all the other billions continue forward. It's a forward going. This is important to understand because philosophically, life is not about dark versus light, good versus evil. Polarities are stagnating. They enchain us. They put cuffs on our intelligence and they limit us to. Well, I don't want to get it. That's not what I was. So basically, thus are our physical functions all stably going forward. For example, our digestive system. You know, we nurture ourselves. We eat. We inflate with nutrition. We get it. We run it through our body, and we expel the waste. And then we start it all over. It never comes to like a final thing. It's a constantly flowing forward, and that's its stability. The same thing is with human sexuality. Human sexuality is meant to come. It's funny. I'm talking and I'm listening to a little thumb thing of Matt. He's talking in silence, and it looked okay. Anyways, I had to move the mouse. So human sexuality is also a forward-going stability. The way it's designed, slightly different to the digestive system, of course. It consummates in a crescendo of sexuality, of having sex, and it's ending or its ending part of the sexual encounter may or may not result in a pregnancy, but it's never a backwards, it's never a negative, it's always a forward stability, and such as all stability in life, and the natural design of life. Homosexuality is we create, and I know some people immediately react to that like saying it's not a choice. No, I said before, it's nature that does it for a reason. If I say, we choose to behave, it's basically saying the body does it. Okay. Um, so we shouldn't really grab hysterically to prejudices associated to terminology if we want to change our understanding of something that is as complex as homosexuality. Um, so yeah, because we inverted and we have talking about males again, it's easier also to explain. I'm pretty sure it is that if a woman had to do my version of this version of homosexuality for women, um, you instantly create, or what you have is as the expression of homosexual nature, which is simultaneously two forces. This is, I didn't quite nail it down on the last video. It's a sort of forward, mainly governed by the biological chemical that wants to have sex and ecstasy and pleasure and wants to ravish and feel loved and a bunch of things that are really not distinguishing so much if it's a male or a female. That's the 1/3 part of the pie I explained before. And that creates a forward force. That is basically what's responsible for guys who never thought about it or had an inclination, but who knows, a straight guy was convinced or what have you, to have a pleasurable experience, depending on the personality, the psychology of that person. It may be more or less, but generally speaking, if the rewarding satisfaction associated to attraction is not there, there won't be as much reward in the behavior of homosexuality. Although there will be panting, exciting, coming, and there are incredible mechanisms that the body will perform that will shock people. We're not a society that is comfortable with this, but that's why I think it's fascinating that we got serious about it, we owned it, and were for the first time truthful in describing how the phenomena of human homosexuality, which does not either accept it nor deny it. It's not for it or it's not against it. It happens for a reason, and that's the crux of the situation. It happens for a reason. We need to understand better why it happens to human society, because really it's society and culture and environment influences, and some influences before birth as well, that cause this in the life of individuals who later are the ones that are stuck with it. And yet we don't know how, as a society, potentially healing, I wouldn't say reversible, but it's almost like, okay, you stuck your hand out of the car window, and now you open the window, and maybe it's not good that you continue playing with your little hand, even though your mom is telling you put your arm back inside the car. But you'll still, maybe ride for the rest of that ride with your elbow on the open window, because you just know that much now that it's impossible for you to raise the window and have the same happy existence that somebody would have had in your place who never rolled down the window and never even put their elbow outside, and just as fulfilled about life as you now can only be by keeping your elbow on the side of the car. Okay. So the whole area of healing reversible is a subject in itself that we're far from even attempting, being able to start looking at. We're so far into crazy extremology of artificial ideologies that we can't even just comfortably sit down and talk about our own sexuality and why homosexuality occurs to the species. And so inherently it's, I would say, unstable, because it's not designed to be that way. It's not designed. By inverting it, by putting a male with a male or a female with a female, you kill the stability of it. Now, it sounds drastic, it sounds extreme, but it's sort of a scientific explanation that lies deeply underneath the social experience of a happy life. It's not maybe what we experience. We're explaining scientifically dynamics and things that happen that later, that explain what later happens and why later we react as a society, and we continue to seek peace with it. We never have peace with it. We continue to make a fuss and make noise and call for attention, and there's something that doesn't sit right. And it's hard to, one wouldn't come out and say, with the thing is, you're asking for validation of yourself or something complicated, kind of you're looking for yourself to to believe in you. But there are various ways that can be said that are not untrue, and yet they share a space with many other ways of interpreting the scientific explanation. Continue looking for your dad. You still feel you're not enough, or you feel like you won't please women because they don't see you as a man, not because you're maybe not physically enough, but mostly to do with you thinking that women don't see you as a man. And that can be traced back to how your mom treated you, because moms naturally have in their nature a way of sort of standing back, and when a little boy is making a lot of noise and he has to get dirty and he has to climb that tree and break his arm, when he falls, they kind of they desperately go and try to stop him. But at the same time, there's a part of wisdom of mothers that if the boy insists too much, there's a whole, I was kind of shooting off a deep end there, because it's actually the dad that knows, it's more in tune with that knows that the little boy needs to learn on his own. But now I know, now I remember what it was. Mothers are more tolerant when boys are a little violent with them, like they pull their hair or they lose their patience, and the kid, the toddler, loses his patience, or maybe pulls and yanks the mom and wants his way, and the moms are kind of let them work out all that effervescence and all that. They don't sit on the little boy typically. When you have a mother that wants to shut you up is when problems start happening in the development of that kid, or when a mother doesn't think that anything the little boy does is impressive or admiration worthy. Again, mothers are like, wow, look at what he did, and then the boy feels like he's important, and so that little lion starts developing. And so there's this whole area. I'm obviously not a professional or all that knowledgeable in it, but as a subject matter, it's nothing new. I mean, I'm not talking rocket science. We have all this in a bunch of different languages. The literature is there, and with all its errors, the whole area has been getting advanced onto. But we decided in the 70s basically to shut it up and no longer be smart, no longer be scientifically intelligent about our own homosexual development, and decided to make it a civil category of people that has to do with civil rights, and now politics, and now candidates are running that's what we did with our own sexuality. It's amazing. So did I answer properly last time? Yeah. And so because the right thing would be is to continue letting our logical analytical intelligence and our wise, sort of ever-present natural form intelligence consciousness continue to walk together. The natural brain always saying, okay, what's logical intelligence gonna come up with now? Get ready, brace yourselves. But continuing nonetheless walking towards understanding. Um, you know, and what we did is we silenced one and we let the analytical, logical intelligence arrogantly just careen out of control and prescribe a whole construct. That's the actual social construct. Uh, not what's natural. What's natural is not the social construct. What's the social construct is what we made of answering the understanding it. In order to, we gave it a form. We gave it a social class, category, a label of gender, and a whole bunch. That's the construct. And of course, we intuitively feel its insincerity. That's why it never. That's why it's unstable. Its instability will continue to be there, because the nature instability is within the nature of homosexuality. So no matter how many constructs we make, if we don't join in back into it, nature, which are natural sciences. Oh yes, natural sciences, biology, and chemistry are also constructions of our logical and analytical intelligence. But wherever our sciences are paying attention to nature and natural design in their own making, they're usually a lot closer to not failing and getting it right. The more it tries to invent something and forgets about how nature would do it, the more the tendency for it to go haywire on its own and screw up and end up hurting us and betraying us is plausible. So it's very interesting. Sciences like architecture tend to immediately catch their mistakes. Okay, I'm kind of losing my tangent here. So the instability of homosexuality is innate in its nature. And so, what's also, I wanted to give, I'll just finish with this because I kind of lost myself in this whole thing, but I wanted to present another image that I think is really interesting to understand why the science of homosexuality is so interesting. For one thing, if we really used it, accepted it, and used it to, through understanding, see what it is that's causing an increase, for example, in more individuals that seek homosexuality, there's a whole bunch of different areas. Would it be stable once understood biologically? Because there's this fear that people, it has to be a sin, it has to be evil, it has to be fought, it has to be quashed, it's bad, and end of story. Doesn't matter if nature does it, it's either God or just bad, repulsive, separate. And then people who don't take that route and understand it being sort of like the appendix of a useless appendix that can be inflamed, and when it does, it's because of things you ate, it's because of how it was nurtured and how you were treated as a child, and what maybe you came with, some biological tendency to be more affected by those things that would treat you a certain way later. And accept all that will maybe pose later the question, well, so then if we accept it and no longer we identify the 50% aversion or repelling force of it, because that's the instability has to do with a simultaneous existence of two forces in homosexuality. One that is okay, it's about sex, it can be attractive, it's sexual, it's hot, it can be whatever, as all sexuality is. And at the same time, because of the inversion of it, it comes with sort of like a price. It comes with sort of an aversion, a natural aversion. So the true definition of the word homophobia, for example, is not what they are trying to what is being tried to define socially, what it's used for, much less, which is to sort of chastise and punish people and separate them and cast them out of a conversation immediately so you can shut them up. That's what basically the word homophobia functions for, is to say you're too evil to be part of this conversation. Now, actually, homophobia exists. That's what's interesting, is that homophobia is that part. It's a partial area. It's a part of homosexual nature. By nature exists, that because of its nature exists as the result of putting a positive against a negative, or a northern flowing force against a southern flowing force, or having two rivers collide head to head, and creating the nature of a single behavior, which is homosexuality. And therefore you have in its nature two forces. I wouldn't say it's 50-50. What matters is that they're both there. And that's what it creates, the instability, because in all other living functions of living forms, whether they be a singular or the emergence of two things that need to work together or complement, it's all a stability that both go forward for the purposes of living and evolving and continuing to the sun to shine forward and light and life to continue going forward. So when you turn around the gender and you have sex with the same gender, you're creating a situation where you're creating two opposite forces to have to live together, to exist together in a single form. It's not, I mean, when you understand this, and especially if you live some years homosexually, you think back at experiences and how guys behave, it starts making a lot of sense. For example, how men, for example, are very promiscuous. It was simply dismissed as that. What you found is even good guys who were not just trying to satisfy their own need for a daddy or for getting off, and just never even said hello to you the next day, but you met somebody who was decent, who was a respecting person, who was a guy that could have easily become a good friend had it not been because he had sex the night before. But you still noticed something that was like not conducive to want to continue something, go fishing someday, it seems that people that decide they want to live homosexually, it helps people who decide to want to live homosexually, because it's a way of educating yourself to go against the counter forces of its nature. And so you construct social homosexuality. It's a construction. You learn how to do it first, and literally some guy with more experience will tell you, squeeze harder, do this and that. But there are a lot of tattletale signs that speak of this true description of its nature. For example, that even the gay guys, they'll tell you they're embarrassed to say they're bottom, but if they're top, usually they'll go, "Hey, I'm the top," So what's that about, right? I mean, they make fun of it and they don't think anything of it, right? But basically, it has to do with the fact that there is a preference in male sexual energy to be a forward going than to be like a receiving, submissive. Now, if the other gay guy was a woman, they wouldn't take it personally. They wouldn't think it's just how life is. They're the receiver, and they're bigger and greater and more complete because of that. So they wouldn't have that in their mind. But because it is a guy, there's that natural psychological thing that, oh God, it's a secret. Don't tell people I'm a bottom. Anyways, a lot of things actually start making sense when you understand how homosexuality, the mechanics of its nature actually work. Another interesting metaphor, which I just thought of a little while ago, was that its instability in this inversion, this simultaneous opposite forces in this inversion that occurs by defining integrally a behavior, you could have a metaphor that's a visual of this instability. Like, I don't know if you've ever played with video editing programs. You've probably seen it in a camera or try maybe the concept if you're an artist. But when you you take a a screenshot of your own video editor, and the screenshot has a screenshot within a screenshot within a screenshot, and if you got yourself in that screenshot in a camera, for example, you would see your head go into your screen endlessly, infinitely, into the screenshot of the screenshot of the screenshot. And take that image, and then with each echoing repetition, flip it. So one screen is like this, and the other screen one's like that. One screenshot's like that, and the other screenshot like that. That is a metaphor for what happens in homosexuality. It's incredible. Now, why is that interesting? Because it keeps re-erupting in. Okay, for example, if I know many people have experience with this, but the whole secrecy aspect, right? What is that about? Why have for all of time, I'm sure that it's always been the same, where, there's guys that, oh, we're part of the macho culture, and there's always a group of those, of the male population that doesn't really have such a version or a thing or a fear or that part of that phobia, that natural small portion of phobia that's inherent in the nature of homosexuality is not expressed, it's not strong at all. They're just, the other kind of mind. They're more of the nature, nurture, in tune with natural form, ever-present community collective part of the mind. The brain is basically too the evolution, individualist, pushing, sort of leading the pioneer bandwagon kind of logical mind, and the mind that's more in tune with everyone and everything. And anyways, so anyway, some of those guys, and those are the guys that maybe are interested, because what they see is a guy that would have sex as easily as male sexual nature is, meaning he doesn't have to play the whole game of seducing, commitment with a girl and all the prospects, or all of the, not prospects, but all of the oh God, how to say this, all of that which is stability of the rapport with a relationship that may be sexual relationship with a woman would open up for the future. When he's looking at that guy, he's looking at a situation where he can just have sex and there won't be any price related to it because he has male sexual nature, which is so he's like feeding into the opposite side of that instability, and maybe he'll have sex secretly with that guy, and as long as the other guys don't find out, right? The typical thing that we're very familiar with in culture today, and there's humor and there's stuff, and there's drama, and then the gay guy that wanted to seduce the straight guy, and then he got angry when he was dumped, and so he thinks of making a scene in front of his straight buddies, but he never does, because even though he's gay, he's also in tune with that male side inside of him that is about honor and strength of honor. So it's really fascinating because it keeps flipping inside. And so by the same token, in the gay guy, just to be quick, there is a stealthiness, a way of saying hiding, because he knows that a straight guy has honor and will not look kindly on his advances. So he fools them, the typical joke of the beer, right? Of getting the straight guy drunk with beer so that, or paying them. And so there are all these games that happen. You know, the immigrant that will, I don't know, I don't want to say any nations, but where I've experienced this, but where a guy is straight, but you know, in his down and out situation, traveling around the world broke, maybe tries to make a quick buck, and what he cares most about is that you pay to give him a blowjob or something. And so all these situations, nuances, I mean, situations are very particular to interaction between males in homosexuality, and not just so basically, you know, we don't have a culture that openly that exhibits it all, like pans it all out, spreads it all out for everybody to see all these different things that happen when it comes to homosexual behavior between males, because we're so afraid, intimidated, and so challenged with you know, investing ourselves emotionally and talking. I mean, it's about ourselves and investing our own intimate emotions, especially if you're straight, in talking about it. It's difficult, right? It's difficult if, like, for these examples that I'm mentioning would be easy to talk and joke around about, guys that have lived homosexually, but for straight guys, it would be like, okay, all right, yeah, sure, I think I've seen that, whatever. And yet, ultimately, the goal would have to be, what would understanding human sexuality lead to? And this is what I was trying to say before. Some who are okay with seeing the whole picture will say, well, but then if there's always going to be, what happens if a guy first does it in secret, first does it with a beer, or does it with a good friend, and then likes it, right? That's what they say. That wouldn't happen, because this is the element that the duality, the dual forces situation happening in the nature of homosexuality never go away, right? Now, remember, there are situations in which, because some males, so in other words, every male is capable of experiencing and feeling the pleasures, the excitement, and the bodily mechanical movements as well, playing the female part. Even if he's straight, somehow it kicks in, because that's the whole chemical, natural, biological part of sexuality that really doesn't care. Somehow it reacts to being penetrated, or if it's going to penetrate. You see it in flip-flop gay guys, that they convince you being a perfect top, and then before you know it, they're screaming like, you know, like a Dutch whore. No, like a what? Anyways, and so that's fascinating, right? And so there's that, but then there's the part that has to do with the psychology. And that's where we understand better. The social cultural nurtures the psychological part, and that's what carries the satisfaction, reward, not just the attraction, as they say, but the part where it says, wow, there was something missing there. There was something, this somehow fits. This makes me feel better. This makes me feel like I belong, like I'm accepted, like I'm no longer worried about being accepted or seen as a male by women, or whatever it is that is happening psychologically, that was developed psychologically in that person, gets healed. It's like a Band-Aid that gets put on that person. And so that's where we have the people to whom homosexuality responds more favorably. You can't blame these people for being natural, for saying, you know, I don't want to get burned, I'm taking my arm away from the flame. Well, it's the same thing. Or I don't want to be cold, I'm putting my arm above the flame to warm up my arm. It's the same thing. It's basically guys that have society, culture, their family, and maybe some spices that were thrown in before birth in their biology or what have you, did to them, and so they now, when it comes to, it wasn't, it was happening to them in a world, in a civilization, in a society that wasn't savvy, that wasn't knowledgeable about the development of its own sexuality. So it just continued on, and nobody, now we certainly quashed it. We certainly shut ourselves up. We're not supposed to even tend to that anymore. We were starting to, up into the 70s, we were starting to think, how does this happen? Look, it has to do with the mom, the dad, the da da da. And we're also, now you're born that way, and that whole discussion was there. But then we dropped the hatch on that one, and so now we're really stupid about our own sexuality. Really stupid because we're inventing stuff to try to continue answer the questions that will not shut up. The question that are produced by the ongoing instability of it. So in order to stop the stupid questions, we need to create a stability, a social, cultural, possibly, stability about the occurrence of human sexuality, human homosexuality. And that would mean becoming intelligent about this that can happen to human sexuality, which is the development of homosexuality. And that means that understanding how it happens would not only maybe start giving a lot of guys a chance to find those who will receive, who are there to say, hey, oh yeah, you don't need to say it, you don't need to explain it. What you really want a guy that believes in you, a good friend, and there's a bunch of, and we will know, we will be savvy as a society to understand it. It won't be something we're afraid to look at, something that gets explained with artificial stories or categories, like the Roman senators' pets, or the Spartan girlfriend, and or to give examples of all the different ways that we have tried to give it a little niche. We have always looked for a niche. Some niches have a rope to a post in Iran, but we have always tried to, and in fact, in Iran, that's not fair. That's not fair. So, because you know what they do in Iran? What they don't tolerate in Iran is you hiding it, is you saying, acting like you're the deceptive part, acting like you're straight, and then seducing a straight guy, or a guy that was married. Ooh, that's really bad. They'll hang you. But what they do in Iran is that you have to say, I act a certain way and act like a transvestite, and then there's a place for, so even in Iran there's a place for it. You have to conform to, and so, and this happens because 50% of that dual energy, and is positive. It's somehow we forgive it because it's sexual, because it's about love somehow, because it's, so that's what I meant by everything is true. We just need to order it right. And now, again, going back to, some would say, well, what happens if we really see it as a phenomena that can happen to our sexuality because nature's trying to compensate for something, and therefore we support it, we don't condemn the individual, we realize that society did it to a person. That means that those guys that were not really, hey, I'm a man, get away from here, but are the ones that were kind of willing to play around because they knew they would walk away, they knew they didn't feel that natural. Let's make an example of those, because among those there were those that maybe do find a reward, or a satisfaction in it. But let's think about the males who no longer hate, and so intelligence about homosexuality will also, in culture, would also start diminishing those men that are really, not against, but they would be more accepting of being, I don't know, hugging a gay guy, letting a gay guy hug him and kiss him and play around. We already have that, right? And so some people would say, because there's kind of a theory that is based on male sexuality having a stronger drive than female sexuality. So now some people might debate that, question that. And so, if women become, if sex, if a society is only about sexual satisfaction and becomes less about family, about a couple, become about children, and becomes a functional sport, and we have a society that, on top of it, has lost condemnation of homosexuality because it understands it's something nature resorts to that we wouldn't choose, but these guys, it happens to them, and we can still love them and include them, and we lose that fear. Is there a danger that because male sexuality is stronger, that more men would get into it? And I wonder if this hasn't happened in civilization already, because it's like a sexuality is only for pleasure and orgasm, and there's no, would it start festering among males because women are less interesting to men in a society where women have become less interesting? Men are they're not really crazy about women who are bossy, and only weak men that still need their mother and need to be told what to do. Guys that are fully formed kind of don't like girls that don't appreciate them, because that's part of our nature. You don't lead, you don't want to do and give for society, for others in your family. If you don't sense that you are appreciated and beloved, and nobody wants to be a tyrant. No matter what certain feminists say. So there's an interesting theory that says, well, it's a theory I came up with anyways, because I took it even further. But anyways, it wouldn't never come to that, because even if guys were to say, it would be interesting to see what culture would come about from a loss of ignorance, and a loss of anger, and a loss of confusion towards guys that sought homosexuality. Because so you would have guys that, many more guys that would be okay up to a point, and that's the whole thing. It's kind of like it would be a self-regulating thing, because of the dual nature of homosexuality, and guys that never developed a need where it would feel like a band-aid, like something that was finally attended to, like they're finally recognized, or they now don't have to worry about feeling like a man because a man loves them, and all that makes it compensating or attractive or satisfying to a guy who developed it, has the experience that biology and chemistry, maybe some empathy perhaps as a friend, doesn't see anything so terrible about being naked with his friend, or but anyways, they get to a point where they run into the other force. So that's why typically you have two guys that tried it and then the next morning they look the other way and they never talk about it again. And that would happen in such a society, in a culture. So there is no risk, losing fear, losing homophobia, but the real homophobia, not the one that is reproached, the natural kind, the kind that is there for a reason. It's nature has it there so that we kind of know, make sure that we don't confuse, the positive, the beneficial sort of aversion, or what do you call it? Not repulsion. What's the other one? The pushback force, in any case, is there for a reason, and so that is stronger in guys, even if they can recognize a guy pretty, or a guy that maybe he wants to feel the pleasure for a little bit, or he likes some guys. I've seen straight guys that like the ego, how much they're desired by another man, which is, it's kind of interesting ballpark because men like to be admired by other men, and so some straight guy may transfer that to a sexual encounter. But in any case, the counter energy is always stronger and doesn't. It's not like all of a sudden it would be a contagion epidemic, and unless, of course, women was a society where women were really mean and demanding and complicated, unappreciative and hostile and manipulative and a bunch of things, vicious. That's not the West. No, that's not the West at all. So something isn't there not because of not something else. There's nothing that is nurtured and continuing on the way it is because there isn't a reason for it. There's also that to throw in the whole mix. So I'll just leave it at that. In Spanish they say, "To he who understands well, few words are necessary." Fewer words are necessary. So, okay, those are the details I wanted to throw in to add to my last video. Thanks again.